Hey everyone. This story doesn't begin with success. It begins with silence. The kind of silence that follows betrayal, when doors close, voices disappear, and the world suddenly feels too large for someone standing alone with empty hands. Before anything else, take a second to like, subscribe, and stay with me until the end, because this isn't just a story of revenge. This is a story of transformation. Welcome to Black Queen Dominion. I was not born into nothing. I was born into promise. A family name that meant something, a home that echoed with laughter once, and adults who spoke about loyalty and love like sacred vows. But promises, I learned early, can be temporary. When the cracks began to show, they showed quietly. Missed school fees, conversations held behind closed doors, decisions made without me. I was still young enough to believe I belonged, old enough to feel when I didn't. The moment everything collapsed wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no emotional speeches. Just paperwork, cold expressions, and a final confirmation that whatever protection I thought I had was gone. I was left with nothing that day. No inheritance, no support, no safety net. They called it responsibility. They called it necessity. I called it abandonment. I watched them walk away with the confidence of people who believed I would never rise above the dust they left me in. To them, I was a liability trimmed from the budget of their lives. Someone who would fade quietly, become a cautionary tale, or disappear altogether. What they didn't realize was that abandonment doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it ignites. With nowhere to go, I learned how cold the world can be when your last name stops opening doors. I learned how hunger sharpens focus and how humiliation can either crush you or carve you into something stronger. I worked jobs that drained my body and nights that tested my spirit. I slept in places that reminded me daily how far I'd fallen. But even then, something unbreakable lived inside me. I paid attention. While others saw exhaustion, I saw education. Every system that dismissed me taught me how it worked. Every closed door showed me where power truly lived. I studied money not from books at first, but from watching who had it and how they treated those who didn't. I learned that wealth wasn't just currency. It was leverage, silence, and freedom. There were moments I almost gave up. Nights when the loneliness pressed so hard it felt physical. Days when hope seemed irresponsible. But anger, when controlled, can be fuel. And mine burned clean and steady. I promised myself that if the world insisted on treating me as invisible, I would become unforgettable. By the end of that first year alone, I had nothing to show on the outside. But inside, something dangerous was forming. Clarity. I understood that no one was coming to save me. And that realization didn't weaken me, it crowned me. As this chapter closes, the ground beneath me was still unstable, but my direction was set. I didn't know how long it would take or what it would cost. I only knew this. I would never beg for a place at a table that once pushed me away. And somewhere far away, the people who left me believed the story was already over. It had only just begun. Starting from nothing doesn't mean starting empty. It means starting unseen. When you have no audience, no cheerleaders, and no safety net, every move you make belongs entirely to you. That anonymity became my shield. While the world looked elsewhere, I built in silence. I began with survival, but survival quickly evolved into strategy. I saved relentlessly, learned obsessively, and observed patiently. Every dollar I earned was treated like a soldier, sent on missions instead of wasted on comfort. I didn't chase luxury. I chased control. I wanted systems that paid me back, not applause that faded. Mistakes were part of the process. I lost money. I trusted the wrong people. I misjudged timing. But unlike before, failure no longer felt like proof of my worthlessness. It felt like tuition. I paid it, learned from it, and moved forward without bitterness. The first real breakthrough didn't look impressive from the outside. It was a modest opportunity, hidden inside a neglected corner of the market most people overlooked. While others chased trends, I chased fundamentals. I focused on value, consistency, and long-term growth. Slowly, predictably, the numbers began to change. What mattered more than the money was the shift inside me. I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking structurally. I learned how power consolidates, how narratives are shaped, and how silence can be more intimidating than noise. I built relationships carefully, never revealing how far I planned to go. As my income stabilized, I reinvested aggressively. I expanded my knowledge into finance, real assets, and ownership. I didn't just want to earn money, I wanted to own time. Each step forward reduced my dependence on anyone else's approval. Years passed this way. Quiet years. Productive years. I moved through life without announcing my progress, without updating anyone who once dismissed me. The hunger that once came from fear now came from ambition. I wasn't running from the past anymore. I was running toward a future that answered only to me. By the time I crossed my first major financial milestone, something unexpected happened. I felt calm. Not excited. Not vindicated. Just calm. Because the real victory wasn't the number. It was the certainty that no one could ever leave me with nothing again. Unbeknownst to me, whispers had begun to travel. My name surfaced in conversations I wasn't part of. People who once forgot I existed started asking questions. Not out of concern but curiosity. And curiosity I knew was the prelude to return. Money changes the volume of your life. Not because you speak louder but because others start listening. As my success became harder to ignore, the silence around me shifted. Doors opened that once slammed shut. Invitations arrived without explanation. Respect appeared where dismissal once lived. I didn't rush to embrace it. I had learned too much to be flattered by attention. That I watched. I noticed who celebrated my growth genuinely and who studied it like an opportunity. I remembered who vanished when I needed help and who stood nearby when there was nothing to gain. My work expanded into industries that demanded authority, not permission. Ownership replaced effort. Strategy replaced struggle. My name was no longer attached to desperation. It was attached to influence. I became the kind of person whose decisions affected outcomes. That was when they came back. Not dramatically. Not apologetically. They returned with familiarity, with softened voices and selective memory. They spoke as if time had erased the past. As if abandonment had been a misunderstanding. As if success rewrote history. They congratulated me publicly while privately positioning themselves closer. They referenced shared roots, shared blood, shared stories they once walked away from. To them, my millions were a bridge back into relevance. I didn't confront them. I didn't accuse. I didn't expose. Power had taught me patience. I welcomed them with politeness, not warmth. I offered access, not trust. I allowed proximity, not intimacy. Because real revenge doesn't raise its voice. It lets people reveal themselves. As they grew more comfortable, their expectations grew bolder. They hinted at support, at partnership, at entitlement. They assumed reconciliation came with rewards. What they didn't realize was that every interaction was being evaluated, not emotionally but strategically. I had built something they could never understand. Not just wealth but discernment. I could now see patterns instead of excuses. Motives instead of smiles. And their motives were painfully clear. They didn't miss me. They missed the benefits of me. And for the first time the power dynamic had completely reversed. Revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like denial. The most powerful word I learned wasn't confrontation. It was no. Not spoken harshly, not delivered emotionally. Just enforced consistently. As they tested boundaries, I calmly reinforced them. Access was limited. Requests were delayed. Expectations were redirected. I never explained myself. I didn't owe explanations to people who once erased me. Their confusion was visible. They couldn't understand why proximity didn't translate into privilege. They assumed my success had softened me. They were wrong. It had clarified me. I watched them grow frustrated as the advantages they expected never arrived. They attempted guilt, nostalgia, obligation. None of it worked. Because I had already mourned them years ago. You can't abandon someone and return to collect rewards without accountability. Instead of dramatic rejection, I chose something more effective. Independence. I continued to rise without including them. I supported causes, communities, and people who reflected my values, not my past wounds. Eventually, the truth settled in for them. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was simply unavailable. And that realization hurt more than any argument ever could. Dominion is not a moment. It is a condition of the soul. By the time my life reached the height others only saw in numbers and headlines, I had already crossed a far more important threshold. The point where my past could no longer reach me. Wealth gave me options, but self-mastery gave me peace. And peace, I learned, is the rarest luxury of all. I no longer moved through the world explaining myself. Silence became my signature. Where I once needed to be understood, I now required only alignment. My days were structured by intention, not urgency. My nights were quiet, not restless. The hunger that once burned in me had transformed into vision. Steady, focused, unshakable. People often assume that when you rise this high, you must feel triumphant. But what I felt was clarity. A deep understanding of how abandonment reshapes you if you survive it. How being left behind sharpens your instincts. How being underestimated teaches you to build without permission. I didn't celebrate when they finally stopped reaching out. I didn't feel victorious when the invitations slowed, when the calls became less frequent, when their interest faded as they realized I would never reopen the doors they once slammed shut. I felt relief. Because closure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from consistency. My empire, because that is what it had become, was built on foundations they would never touch. Ownership structures, investments, partnerships, and decisions designed to outlive trends and opinions. I wasn't just wealthy, I was insulated. I had created a life where my security didn't depend on anyone's approval, loyalty, or affection. What surprised me most was how many people saw themselves in my journey. Strangers who never knew my name began to mirror my story back to me through admiration, through respect, through inspiration. They saw resilience where my family once saw inconvenience. They saw leadership where others saw expendability. And that is when I understood the final lesson of abandonment. When you are forced to stand alone long enough, you learn how to stand for others. I became intentional about where my influence landed. I supported women who were overlooked, underestimated, and undervalued. I invested in ideas that traditional gatekeepers ignored. I created opportunities where there had once only been barriers. Not because I wanted to be praised, but because I knew exactly what it felt like to be dismissed. Legacy replaced revenge as my motivation. The truth is, the people who left me never truly lost access to my wealth. They lost access to me. And that loss mattered more than anything money could have given them. Because presence once withdrawn cannot be bought back. I no longer define myself by what was taken from me. I define myself by what I built in its absence. Every achievement carries the quiet echo of a promise I made to myself in the darkest season of my life. That I would never abandon myself the way others did. Now when I look back, I don't see pain first. I see preparation. I see a version of myself forged by neglect, sharpened by struggle, and crowned by discipline. I see someone who didn't just survive being left with nothing, but mastered it. There is a particular power in knowing that no matter who walks away, you remain whole. That no matter who doubts you, your results answer for you. That no matter how your story began, you get to decide how it ends. They left me with nothing, believing nothing would come of me. They returned when I had millions, believing I would need them again. But by then I had something they could never reclaim. Autonomy. Discernment. Dominion. This is not a story about bitterness. It is a story about boundaries. About becoming so grounded in your worth that the past loses its grip. About rising so high that old wounds can no longer reach you. And if there is one truth this journey proves, it is this. When a queen builds her own kingdom, she never begs for entry again. The crown was never given to me. I claimed it,